This fishtail is painted in black water. This is an underpainting for the picture, and we will set it up so it's a beautiful space. But the first step when you get the painting is to take a big wide brush, dip it in the water, and then dip it in just a black paint and paint all of the space around the fishtail, including the bottom water where the fish is actually swimming. And then we're just going to break up that space and let the mirror image of the fishtail work right through the bottom area. But everything is painted black except the mirror image, and all of that space is filled in just with a black color right out of the tube. When you finish that, you can fill in the black space with the same big brush to start the big shape, but then you'll change down and use one that's a little bit smaller so you can get the detail. But just while you have the big brush and you have the black paint on it, just go in and put some of the black in to set up the underpainting, and then you'll be ready to get a smaller round brush. You dip it in water and then dip it in your paint, and then mix the paint into the brush by turning the brush around and around and around on your palette so that you are collecting the water and the paint and that you are mixing it together. Then you can use that point to go around and actually make the fishtail shape that you want it to have. The point just goes around and follows the line or the edge of the shape, and you'll just have to keep using the point in different directions so you can change your wrist movement until it defines a very simple way for you to go around and make the detail. Now, as you notice that we have left the space because we do not want to have to paint over anything that's black. If you paint over a black shape, like the one that I put down in the reflection to give you an example, it is very hard to get orange or any color that's lighter than black to show up. See how it would look if we tried to put the orange on top of that black? It would look muddy looking, or it would never look like a true bright orange. So for us to be able to get that, we're not going to put that black color in for where we want our mirror image to be. We're actually just going to put the black where it's going to be black, and we're going to leave everything open to white on the canvas so that we can put the color in. Use your round brush with black paint to identify the space that separates the fish's tail from the reflection in the water. And you can see how I just closed up the space in between so that you can see the area that separates the fish's tail from its reflection in the water. Now, pick up the big brush with the black paint in it and wipe it off with the paper towel, and then wash it in the water. Agitate it back and forth until you get all of the black paint out, and then you can put it up and save it till you need it again. The next step is to get the ultramarine blue, and we're going to add colors into the ultramarine blue so that we can add it into the water to give it life. We want the background to be very fun and interesting to look at. We want the viewer, when they look at your painting, to see how much variety that you can put in that black water and still make it fun and interesting to look at. So if you add a little bit of the red to the picture, You can see how putting the red and blue together make a purple color that looks nice. I'm going to add a little bit of the alizarin red into that mix so you get a reddish color on the violet side. And with that, it'll go right into the black and look like you want it to, with the color working together. So now you have a very dark violet. It's not as dark as the black, but when you use that color to put on top of black, you can still see it as you rub it across, and you can get it like shimmers of light that just go right into that black space. But the important thing is you're just going to use some of the lines with your brush. You're going to make strokes. And in doing that, you feel like that when you look at the painting that you're going to see the shimmers because you have those other colors included in your black area. And it's not just a flat black, but it's a very interesting color. So we're just going to streak across and put those colors in. You can barely see them, but you will begin to notice them more and more as you begin to add paint to your canvas, and especially to your fish in a few minutes. So continue applying this. You have a little darker purple and a little lighter purple, and you can see one time I pick up from one pile, next time I pick up from another, and those purples just glisten across the black, and you really notice them. So continue painting for a while until you feel like that you have them all over the water space. So it's behind the fish tail. And of course, all the space that's painted black can use that same brush stroke with that same color. That includes the reflective space at the bottom. You're making a lot of brush strokes, but every one of them count. Now with the buff color, you're going to add in a lighter touch. So in addition to the darker purple and the medium purple, now you're going to be able to see the blue mixed in with the buff, and it's going to create a light blue color that will blend right into the purplish blue color that was put on previously. So now you can see as you begin to pull that color across that it mixes right in, but shows a little bit more glistening in the water. So there's a little bit more reflection of light, but it's very subtle. With the brush stroke, you just rub it right over the other layers of colors that you've put in, and just put a very limited number of strokes until you feel like that you have enough so that it's interesting to look at, but you don't want it to be too stripy. You just want it to look like the water is being reflected from the light that's around it. Now I added a little bit of the dark brown, which is the burnt umber color. And I'm hitting the brush strokes of color right across the light that shimmers, and it tones it down, or it dulls it down just enough so it doesn't feel too bright. You don't want the lines to distract or take away from the fish. You just want a little color, but the more you layer it, the more interesting it looks. And now with this beautiful brown to turn the ripple colors a little bit on the brown side against the light blue, you can see what interest you create in another layer of coloring going right across the black area. You're just using the round brush, you're just barely touching it across that tacky layer of color that you've been working with throughout the day. You just overpaint the area where the mirror image is going to be, so you don't feel like you're starting and stopping, and it has a flow that goes all the way across. As we begin to look at the color on the fish, we want to use the same blue color that we made with the buff white and the blue color that had a little bit of the black in it. We want to take that color and start blending it along the back of the tail. There's about a 1 inch area that goes from the top of the tail to the bottom of the tail that we will be able to use this color in. We're going to use different values or different lights and darks of the blue. Right along the edge, we want it to be a blue that will show up against the black. So we're putting that color as we begin to cover the white space so that you can see what it looks like. It stands out just enough that you can see it, and it's a real beautiful blue color. It's a bluish gray color. With the round brush, I'm just picking the color up and using the tip of my brush to go in and get the corners. And then when I need a wider space, I'm just tilting the brush a little bit more with an angle so that I can lay in those colors and use the roundness of the brush to work really hard to make the edges or the lines that I need. And then I can use the width of the brush to make the area wider or larger. Now I'm doing just a zigzag, 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 and just pushing the colors together. Just pushing the colors together and adding the buff white into the blues until I fill up a space that's about 1 inch long on the back end of the tail. Every once in a while, I might add a little bit more buff to lighten it up, or a little bit more of the blue to darken it up, because I want it to look like the transparency of the fish tail, and I want it to begin to make connection with the other colors that it's going to mix with, that I will layer in next. So I'm dipping my brush in the water and using a edge to go in and show that reflection in the water so it's the same color as the fish's tail. And now I can use the brush to make the line or the edge of the tail, and then I can also use it to go right in and make up the exact same mirror image that's in the water. So I go in the same direction, and then I make the shape. I'm going to skip a little area and then come down and put a little bit more of the color, because remember, this is a movement in the water of these colors that are being reflected up above it. So it does not need to be the exact replica, but it needs to have some of the same colors, and then there needs to be a little space for the movement in the water to show. And so if I just pick up the brush and move it so that I can blend the colors just a little bit into the black, you can see how that looks like the color is blended and it's reflected in the water. I'm going to actually study the shape of the fish tail, and I'm going to look at the lines that I've drawn. I'm going to look at the color that I have painted in. I'm going to use the information that I have from my photograph to explore the best way that I can put the colors in to be most expressive, to show that it is a fan tail and that you can see through it, like it's almost transparent in some places, but yet you can tell that the colors are very brilliant against the black water background that it has. So in doing that, I'm just going to explore the lines that create the edges of the fish, and then the lines that are going to be painted inside the tail, and make sure that I use those in the best possible way to show that that fan is spread out and that the lines are divided in that space so that you can see each one of those separately. Then I will add ultramarine blue to the palette. I will add the alizarin red into the palette and make a dark violet. I will use white and put just enough white on the end of it that I carry just a smidgen on the tip of the brush. Then I can mix that color together, and you can see how the white lightens up the space that I mixed the paint in. It made it lighter, made the color lighter. And along the line where I put the first blue color, now I'm going to come in and use the blue with some of the alizarin red in it with white as a lighter color. To create interest in the fish. So when you look at the tail, you can see the difference between the blue and the violet. And I want these strokes to go so that you're pulling them in a line and they're going out in the same direction that the lines go, so that the fish's basic shape begins to be emphasized because it's rather complex when you break it down and see how many shapes and colors and lines are in one simple fish tail. So I'm going to use that round brush, and I'm going to pull the brush across, laying it down just a little bit. And those same colors that you saw out that we put in the water a while ago, we can also now see in the fish itself. Turning my canvas on its side will allow me to have that natural stroke with my wrist so that I can just pull a line right through the tail and give it just enough pressure that I can see the line right through the blue paint that I first put in. I didn't make a straight line like you see on a ruler, but I used the point of the brush to divide the spaces. And I want those to go the same direction as the lines that were drawn in the fish, so that they're a continuation of those lines. And as I begin to pick up a little bit more of the blue, making it darker, then you can see that I'll even have more contrast. Add more of the red to even make it darker. So now I'm going more purple. And I'm going to go in and literally make the lines over where the marks are from the drawing. And using that point of the brush, I can just go in and connect the lines together. Adding water to my brush, make sure that it flows and it feels like a completion of a line instead of just drawing a line. I'm actually using the brush to push the colors together from the end of the blue part of the tail that I painted up into the space that I've not painted yet. And this will give me the structure that I need to make sure that the fish tail is strong. The lines are bold. And they give the uniqueness to the fish tail that it needs so that you can recognize it from others. As I begin to add a little bit more red, I can darken up the blue a little bit more and identify the line a little bit darker. And if I do that in stages, it's very subtle. I make sure that the edge at the top point is a little bit darker. And then I dip the white into it, so I have just a little bit added right into that same color. You can see adding white, of course, makes it brighter. Adding a dot of red then gives it that look of violet. But I can use that color now against the dark color, and it really shows up against the lines, and you can see the separation between the light and the dark. Adding a little more light to it. These are very, very subtle changes that are very important for this painting. It's a painting that you really have to study and see the differences of a light blue, a medium blue, and a dark blue. I added a pinch, just a smidgen of the crimson red color. And you can see how that changes. Then I added a little bit more white to it. So it's that little tiny variation of changes that make everything so brilliant about this painting. So lush to look at, so interesting. So once you set up a space on your palette so that you can see your lighter colors, your medium value colors, and your darker colors, then you're ready to come in and put those in your space so that if you use the side of the brush and you literally push the color over the canvas, you're going to get that feeling of texture with the white skimming right across the blues that you have in between each of the dark lines, and you will get a look of the fish tail being transparent so you can see right through it. But it's a build that you have to work on, and it's a delicate, delicate touch. It's a very light touch. And as you noticed when I went over to put the light on top of the dark, that before I took the brush to the canvas, I used the palette as a place to remove a lot of the paint from the brush. So I didn't carry a full brush of paint over to the canvas. I just very lightly brushed it over the top. And now that I have a little bit of the light color put on, I'm beginning to extend that towards the center of the fish tail, so that I can create a new space for the next color, but get a beautiful blend of the colors coming together. Now, as you look at your palette, you can see how many changes it takes place for that to be able to work. I want to make a line that's very flowy, that feels like it's a point that starts in one place and then changes into a line that's drawn across. So one point, And then you continue the line, and you can see I'm making a edge right down the tail, and you can see what emphasis that makes along the edge. But it's not a line that is formal or structured. It is one that's very loose and one that just glides across the fish's tail to emphasize its edge. If I pat my brush onto the paper towel and even remove more paint, I can go down into the shadow of the tail and do the same thing I did on the tail above the water, above the reflection, but very, very soft and very light pressure, barely touching the canvas, blending it so it even has less paint on it and it's less vibrant because it is a reflection in the water. Now, washing my brush again and drying it, I'm able to move in. I want to pick up the next part of the paint, the next color for our fish that we're going to put in. You can see I'm going to show you a way that we can pull new colors together to begin the body of the fish tail. First, I'll scoop up a little bit of the I will use the alizarin red, and then I'll go in and then I will use the brown burnt umber color that's somewhat dark. And I will mix those two colors and begin painting the next space. I'm looking at the structure, the lines that I have created, and I'm painting in that same direction. I'm over painting the space where the blue is so that I overlap enough so that those colors blend together, and you don't see two different colors where they meet. You see an overlapping of one over the other, where the blue and brown meet each other. I'm following the edge of my line so I know the right direction for the tail. And I overlap the blue, and I just continue filling the space. Using the point to just take the paint where I want it to go. As you can see, I'm dividing the space on the top section so that it has the space left in the center. And then I want to use the point of my brush to paint the edge, but I want to do it in a way that my arm feels very natural for the flow. So I'm turning my canvas to the side again, and it's real natural for my arm to go in that direction. So it's real easy to pull the color across and let the point of the brush go exactly where I have it planned to go, and put the paint exactly where I want it to be. Then I can use that round point to divide up the spaces toward the end of the tail, so I can keep those light and airy until I get the next color in. Repeating that same step, I'll go to the next section and I will put a shape in that almost looks like a triangle shape. I'll go from a point and I'll go thicker and thicker, wider and wider, until I reach the area on the back of the tail that's blue. But I'll leave the white space open in the middle so I can put my next color in there, and it'll be a lighter space, a lighter color. And then I'll get ready to repeat, finding the next space that is drawn so that I can begin painting that in. I'll use the point to follow the line, go down toward the inside, and as I go downward, you can see that I'm leaving the space that I need open. So I have the brown fatter towards the blue at the top, and then it gets thinner as it comes down towards the bottom. And you can see the fishtail is really beginning to take shape. So I'll load with more brown that has the alizarin crimson color in it. We'll make a new section using the line as my guide. I'll go from thicker to thinner. Gets very thin towards the center. I'll start a new section the same way. Repetition is a very important principle of design that's used in this painting. We go thin towards the center and the bottom, and we have it thicker toward the back or the blue part of the tail. Then we find a new space. We continue the same, creating a pattern by using the same shape again and again. course, the fish's shape is organic. It's not like standard pieces that are identical to each other. They change. They're not even. They're not made identical to each other. But they are following the pattern from the blue, gradually changing into the brown, going thicker to thinner. I want the same color that's in the tail in the reflection. So I'm picking up the two colors that I mixed together and filling in that space. The white spaces are now becoming reflections in the water. This is the brown and the alizarin red. And because the shapes are already created, it's easy just to use the colors to show the pattern. And using the point of your brush to get into all the corners. And as I look at my picture and distinguish where the real fish tail is and compare it to where the reflection is in the water, I can paint the brown on up into that space. And I can see the area, the line where the reflection is. And where the fishtail begins. So I'm continuing in the reflection and going around the black shape with the brown color that has alizarin crimson mixed in. It's the crimson red. And you can see sometimes it takes 2 or 3 brush strokes going in the same place over and over again until the white canvas is covered. And looking at my photograph of the fish, I can make sure that I'm using the colors that I need to get the match. Now I'll add two other colors to my palette, yellow and orange. I had the red already that I had used before to make some of the purple, but I'm adding yellow and orange and red now to begin the next phase of the painting. I'll start by adding yellow as an underpainting, where I just take yellow right by itself and go through and begin laying it in the space that's going to be the lightest and the brightest, because I don't want anything to fill up that space. I don't want any orange to go there. I don't want any brown, any of the red. So I'm picking up the yellow and going around and making sure that it stays very bright, very brilliant, very yellow on the white canvas. That's very important. I'm going to go all the way around the black shape, using the point of the small round brush. That way I can get in between all the areas that I made with brown colors earlier. And now you can see how the tail is beginning to grow and develop into a very spectacular object. Right now I'm just adding yellow right out of the tube. It's bright, it's colorful, it's vibrant. It's a high contrast from the darker colors that are around it, so it almost glows. You can see I'm not having to stay in the lines. I'm just laying it down using a little bit of pressure and the side of the brush to get a good coverage, sometimes even overlapping the browns and a little bit of the blue. And now all the canvas is basically covered. I can begin by adding a little orange to the palette, adding it right into the yellow that I was using first. I'm really turning my brush around and around and around into the paint so I can get a point on the tip of the brush and have just enough orange to do the job that I need it to do. If I move my canvas around, I can use my wrist to take the orange and scrub it literally right across the yellow so I can see the yellow through the orange. I'm not laying it down thick and heavy. I'm just barely putting enough orange over the top of it that it is transparent and you can see through it. So there are a lot of techniques that you can learn by painting this picture. The transparency of the layers is certainly one of them. You're carrying a little bit of paint on your brush, and you're going right over the top of the color, but you're just touching the top of the canvas teeth, and you're leaving the yellow up underneath to show through. And once again, easy arm rotation, easy wrist movement can be gained by turning that canvas on its side or even upside down if needed. And you just continue adding the orange, looking at your inspiration photograph to see how much you need. You can see how I continue to work my brush over and over the fishtail, carrying the oranges over the yellow and then over the brown. And now I'll add the red to the orange. And I'll make sure that I have enough of that around the point of my brush by taking the brush on the palette and making sure that I'm not carrying any piles of paint. It's a thin application that goes right on top of the brown. And you use the side of the brush and you just scuff on the color. Just scuff on the color over and over again in very light layers continuously. Going from the top of the tailfish down through the middle and to the bottom. Layering the orange, sometimes over the brown, sometimes over the yellow, sometimes even over the blue when you get close to that edge. But it's transparent in the sense that you leave all the colors showing up underneath. So it becomes more and more vibrant. Continue working in the reds and the oranges over the yellows. And going all the way down throughout the fish. The very last section where you see the yellow coming up in that moon shape, you can see that you leave a lot of that yellow showing. So make sure that you watch that area. So you don't put too much red or orange on it. Always looking, always evaluating what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it. so that you can make a decision about what to do next. Now, as you begin to detail in with a small detail brush and add colors that create emphasis on the colors that you're using on the edges around the black shape that you have, you can see that the colors are a little more intense. So I added red into the brush, and now I am using that color around the black shape and putting it more of a concentration of red, and then it goes a little orange as it changes around the edge. Then if I pick up the darker red and mix it with some of the dark, that's the alizarin red, if I use some of it and put it in, you can see it becomes a rusty color with the black pulled in just a little bit. So now I can use that with a little water on the brush, go in and mix that color so that you can really get it throughout your brush. And then I can use it to layer another brown right in over the other yellows and oranges and browns. You can see I'm using almost a wash to layer it in a very transparent way so that you can still see everything that's underneath it. But I'm toning down some of the oranges and reds that are in the middle to make them a little muted. They're not quite as bright. If I layer this brown on the top of them, I just lay the brush on its side and push it across the canvas. You can see that you get a very good blend of those colors, but you can still see the lines that were created by the yellow and the orange and the brown. But now you're pulling the colors all together, but keeping the intensity of the colors themselves. I'm oranging up the area underneath so that you can see how it rounds out all the way around that black shape and separates the fish from the reflection below it, which is so important. I'm darkening up by adding in a little bit of the brown and giving definition to that shape. I'm using that layer by layer by layer, brush stroke by brush stroke. Until it feels very subtle and very natural. And of course, pleasing to look at. Continually refer back to your inspiration picture, your photograph, so that you can study to see what you're painting and how you're developing the lines and the shapes and the colors. And this is one of those paintings that you could continue to layer and layer and layer as much as you wanted to. Until you felt like that you had exactly what you were looking for. Now you can see how that color goes down in the water in the area where the reflection is. It's very subtle. It's very light across the shapes. And it certainly brings out the reflections to let you know that it's a mirror image in the water. But each time it's just a small amount of paint on your brush. And each time you go back into the paint, you can add more blue or brown to it to change it so it gets darker and darker. Until you figure out that you have enough depth in it. And then you can see the line of separation coming right through the two black circles that represent the fish and the reflection of the fish in the water. Very subtle, but very deliberate. Many layers. This might be a painting that you like to watch the video from beginning to end one time first before you actually get out your paint. And then once you see an overall feeling of how the painting will work, I think it will be easier for you to go step by step very easily through the painting and finish it in about the same amount of time that I did. Now we will use the yellow and white to go in and make a halo effect around the black spot that's on the tail. you can change over to the smallest round brush and add more lines that are smaller, that continue to come out from the center of the black shape and continue to spread out from the fish like rays from the sun. So the lines just keep getting thinner and thinner from the inside of the big shape going outward. The yellow and white should be added to several places in the fish and in the reflection area where it is in the water. You can see how you can add those little marks of light color in with the brush, almost like a little half circle, a little curved shape to represent that mirror image. And of course that goes all the way around the black shape. And it emphasizes the black shape and certainly adds interest to the fish. This painting has been so fun to paint, adding layers and layers of lines and shapes and colors to make a fish tail. Thank you for looking at our YouTube video and watching our step-by-step tutorial.